Hello everyone, this is the Cluster API office hours. And before starting, just a quick reminder that we abide to the CNCF code of conduct. So please be kind with each other. We have a meeting agenda doc. I kindly ask you to add your name to the attendee list. And if you have topics, feel free to add them to the discussion topics or provider update or feature group update. As usual, at the beginning of the meeting, we give room to new attendee to introduce themselves. So if you are new to this meeting, please feel free to raise your hand, and the raise hand feature is under reaction in Zoom, and introduce yourself. Okay, it seems that we don't have new. Oh, here we are. Please, Reza.
Hi, this is Reza, based in the Netherlands. I'm a platform engineer, and this is my first time participating in this meeting, and I would love to learn more about the topic.
Welcome. Nice to have you here. Is there someone else? Okay, let's keep going. So we don't have open proposal to discuss, as far as I remember. Let me check quickly. Okay. And so we can start with our discussion topic. And the first one is on Stefan.
Yep. Can you open up here? So basically, this is FYI what we did in core copy, and providers might want to consider the same. I don't know if you noticed, but there was like a big move to use more community infrastructure just in general in Kubernetes. So stuff like moving to a new registry and a bunch of other stuff. Basically, we also have a problem in kube builder, controller runtime, etc. One problem is the kube RBAC proxy image, but that's more like a kube builder topic and not really relevant for here. But another topic is basically to set up env test binaries. So if you're writing unit tests for controller runtime controllers and you're not using fake client and you're not using full client cluster, you're probably using env test to set up a local control plane with API server and etcd. Those binaries are hosted on a Google-owned project in GCP called kubebuilder. I think that's a quote from that upstream issue here, Kubernetes KCO, that can go away at any time whenever Google wants to turn it off. And basically what it means is that when those binaries are going away, then probably your tests are breaking. The way that most people are downloading those binaries is a binary called a setup env test, which is part of controller runtime. What I did in controller runtime and together with Vince essentially, we moved away from this kubebuilder project and the underlying and the corresponding GCS bucket. So what we implemented is essentially that the env test binaries are now hosted on releases on the controller tools repository. Fabrice, maybe you can open controller tools and just one of the random releases there. I don't know if I linked it here. Actually, I linked it even. That's fine. Yep, and then on the right side on releases. Yep, and if you scroll a little bit down, can you just go up? You just have to go to releases and not the specific release. Yep, that's the one. So what you see here is we have a bunch of env test releases. Can you expand one of the assets? Yeah, so basically we publish a release here and then put a bunch of release attachments there, which are the binaries for all 7 operating system architecture combinations. That's basically the only supported way by K8s infra to host not container images. So that's why we went this way. Yeah, so that's where we store them now. If you need a new version of those binaries, you can basically open a PR against controller tools, which is a lot better than what we had before. and get a new version there. So in addition to hosting that stuff there, we also modified setup env test, and basically setup env test on controller runtime main now per default downloads those binaries from controller tools releases. There's still a flag to go for to still download from the old location. But going forward with next controller runtime release, it will be the new location. You can also already opt into the new behavior even on the release branch. So on, I don't know, controller runtime 0.17, I think, you can already use the new way. So TLDR, if you want to have something future-proof, you should probably make the same change as here, and everything else will just work because that new version just defaults to download from the new location, and the new location will stay, the old one will go away. Yep. As you can see here, so I did it in core copy, we backported in core copy. You should backport to all your branches because otherwise CI on your old branches will just break at some point. And down there is basically just a hint in our migration doc that ideally that should be done by everyone.
Thank you, Stefan. Are there any comments, questions about using the migrating to the new setup and test version? Good. Yeah, let me take the opportunity to thank you, Vince, and all the other controller runtime and controller tools maintainers, because we really use a lot of your stuff, and they are always. Next one, it is me or Stefan. Stefan, I'll let you drive.
You don't want really don't want to explain that one. No, I can do it. Want to open your issue?
Okay,
So
yeah, I take it. I take it.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me just give the introduction. I don't know who even knows about that feature. So now Fabrizio. You're muted, Fabrizio.
So when we introduced in cluster class the possibility to import variable from a runtime extension, we had a bunch of discussion about how to handle conflict between two sources, two runtime extension or runtime extension and cluster class, defining a variable with the same name but different types. And we came up with a pretty complex solution that basically allows to exist the same variable with two names, but two definitions. After 1 year dealing with this, we kind of came to a conclusion that this is too complex and fundamentally wrong, because it puts on the user the responsibility to handle messy variable definition. And what we are proposing here is that we are going to deprecate this definition from a feature that allows to have many variables with the same definition, and force the cluster class authors and the runtime extension authors to get an agreement on variable types. So if they want to use a variable which is called HTTP proxy, they have to claim an agreement on what an HTTP proxy is. If they don't want to make an agreement, it is still possible. They just have to name variables, use two different names for the variable. HTTP proxy, my version, HTTP proxy, your version. So this is a cleanup that not only makes things better for the user, because it gives a responsibility to find agreement to the cluster class authors, but it also simplifies a lot of the code around cluster class variable and make it possible to reason to new feature like adding support for CEL, common expression languages for variable validation. So making things simpler is better for users, is better for maintainers, and for the future of this feature. So this is why we are proposing this issue to deprecate this field and drop. Please take a look. Last but not least, since this very, let me say, an edge case, we really hope that no one is having this problem today, so we can deprecate and removing it without causing any annoyance to anyone. So please take a look. If you have feedback, let us know. Stefan, do you want to add something?
Nope, I could.
Great. Questions?
Maybe just that I'm happy once it's gone.
That's a good comment. Thank you. So let's move to the next topic. Michael. Sorry, Matthew. Sorry, Matthew.
No problem. Yeah, we've discussed this one before. There was an action on me to come back with a concrete proposal, which, as I only finished writing it this afternoon, I will forgive you for not having read yet. I realized my YAML is out of date, but essentially, this proposal actually deviates from what we previously discussed, but for reasons that I explain in there. We had so first of all, I've got a big section that summarizes how we got here and various discussions that we had. The deviation is that we had discussed adding this to both kubeadm control plane and machine deployments and machine sets. My observation from having a look, I did a bit of code diving earlier, was first of all, we can implement those things. Only one of them is strictly necessary for the use case, and that's kubeadm control plane. So in any case, I would recommend, if we're going to do both things, doing them in 2 phases, and doing the necessary one first, and then deciding if we need to do the other one. My argument, I would argue against implementing it in machine deployment, although if we did, the solution would look much the same. Yeah, I outlined the reasons why I'm not convinced we should do it in machine deployment in there, but yeah, essentially it boils down to we don't need to, and we're already inconsistent because we can't do this for machine pools. We've already got an API inconsistency. So we might as well simply introduce it in the only place where we need it, which is kubeadm control plane, because we can't replace one of those in a running cluster. So machine deployment, yeah, the other thing is it's a nice pattern in general to have a collection object. Yeah, the members of a collection to be named similarly to the collection object. That's yeah, it's a common pattern. So I think we would want a good reason to deviate from that, and we have that reason in kubeadm control plane. I don't think we have that reason in machine deployment. Yeah, my argument is we should not add it to machine deployment, where machine deployment is actually machine set. But, yeah, because machine deployment is just going to pass it through.
Thank you. What you are referring from this new idea, your proposal, your deviation is already documented somewhere, or?
I updated the description. You updated the description.
The description. Okay.
Yeah, it is completely described in the description.
Stefan?
Just one question, if I got it right. You were saying your YAML is outdated. So it's not an intentional deviation that we're not using naming strategy template and instead naming machine template name prefix. Is that like the part that's outdated, or is that the part that is intentional?
So I literally, while I was talking, I just updated the YAML. Lennart had originally suggested, and I liked the idea when I saw it intuitively, of using Go templating in the name prefix. But yeah, when I looked at it, I thought, do we really need it there? Because the reason for having this is because we're deviating. And in the place where we're writing this, we already know we can statically fill in any value that I think we were proposing adding there. So in the spirit of Yagni, I took it out. I spoke to Lennart. Lennart, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just mentioning that I added the templates first because that was how it was done in the cluster class. But also, I mean, here we are not creating multiple control planes. We are creating one, and we are setting the prefix. So I agree, it doesn't make much sense. You can put whatever you want there statically. It won't change. So yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Just simplifies a little bit. I also think that it will be fine without the machine deployments or machine sets. I will check with my downstream. I mean, it should be fine because you can replace them. The control plane is definitely the main thing that can never change. So, yep.
Andrea?
I still have a hard time to understand what is the goal of this feature. So is that to set the node names of the downstream nodes, right? So this should not touch the host names of the machines. That should be reserved to the infrastructure providers.
No, this is absolutely going to change the host name of the newly created machine. So the justification for that is at the top of the description.
Yeah, and that is what I don't. Yeah, I cannot understand what you mean. Because so right now any infrastructure provider can already define some rules to set up the host names, right? So that is up to the infra provider. But so here I don't understand, right? So let's say if I am an infrastructure provider implementer, do you expect me to read this template and to generate a host name from this?
No.
So what should the infrastructure provider do then?
So that's explained in the preamble to the at the top of this thing. So essentially, the CAPI has CAPI has never had a contract. So different providers ended up implementing different different ways of doing this. But in general, whatever they implemented can be described as being a function of that we know of 3 inputs, being namespace, machine name, and infrastructure machine name. So with the change in question, machine name and infrastructure machine name became the same. So so now, as long as providers continue to name cloud resources as a function of namespace, machine name, and infrastructure machine name, then the node name will end up being related to those things.
But
we're-
sorry if I interrupt, but this is not the case, right? Because you can already set the relation with the provider ID. So for example, I generate random host names. I mean, it is totally decoupled.
So that's interesting. I did actually acknowledge that technical possibility that that it is possible to provide something, a node name which is not a host name, to kubelet, but I was not aware that anybody actually did that. So if you're doing that, then this isn't a problem to you anyway, because you already have another unmanaged. Yeah, that mechanism isn't managed by CAPI, so we can't control that.
But if there is expectation that any infrastructure provider must set up the host name of the physical machines in a certain way,
there isn't.
That is a contract, right?
There is no such, and I explicitly want to avoid in this issue creating one. I want to adopt whatever implementations currently exist and say that is the de facto contract, and just work within what we already have.
If I may add, I'm highlighting a bit of discussion where we are accepting the fact that whatever happened outside of the management cluster, so creating infrastructure, naming cloud resources, naming nodes, is lazily defined by a generic naming function. And each cloud provider ultimately is responsible for defining and documenting how they name things. So probably, if I may suggest, Matthew, we should correct these phrases, because we are not only talking about nodes.
Well, actually, as a user, I'm only interested in nodes. So
not really, because if we go through the discussion, there are points where we say that the user is also interested on how we name cloud resources. So it is not only nodes; it's also cloud resources.
Well, they're only interested. So that's again described in the preamble. So the which is up at the top. Yeah, they're only interested in nodes. So Leonard's saying no. So
yeah, I'm saying that there are multiple, like, I know people want specific host names, they want specific node names, they want specific infrastructure names. It doesn't matter exactly what it is, but they want, yeah, like a prefix in there.
Okay.
Okay.
Andrea, did this answer to your question? And then there is Stefano, which is a head up from a longer time.
Not really, but I wouldn't know what to ask, so I probably need to read more. Sorry, but thank you.
Okay, please feel free to reach out with your with any doubts on the issue. It is 10577, and if it is not linked, yeah, it is linked here. So, okay, Stefan, please go
on. Just, we can also nitpick on the PR. That's totally fine for me. I think it's not a blocker at this point. Anyway, just can you scroll down to the YAML again? I would probably want to make it like slightly more consistent with what we are doing cluster class. Maybe that's only having like naming strategy, and in that naming strategy prefix, so that when we want to change it later, we can also add a template. I'm not sure if we should 100%, you know, nail this down on this would only ever work for prefix. I would want to think a little bit more about if we should really just do prefix, or if we should still do the template, because with template you can also still do a prefix if you want to, but no hard opinion on that one. I just wonder if at least the naming strategy thing should be consistent with cluster class. And then in there, we could only have the prefix maybe.
Okay. But again, my thought was this is only applicable to kubeadm control plane, and really it's still a workaround for one specific thing, because we can't. It's a workaround for not being able to change the name of a kubeadm control plane in an existing cluster. So yeah, I just wanted to keep the scope as small as possible, I guess.
Yeah, I'll need some more time to just think about like prefix versus template, and as I said, no hard opinion on that. But I think probably what would be a good thing anyway is that if at least we go with like machine template naming strategy and then prefix as a subfield, then it's at least consistent that far, and we have like something which we can, if we ever have to, we can just extend it in a way which is more consistent with what we have in cluster class if we ever want to add a template field as well. That's the reason why we did it in cluster class that way. Basically, we added a naming strategy template because then we have an easy option to add other strategies if there's ever reason for. Just like a little bit of like, let's say, forward-looking API design, even if for now we only need this.
Okay.
I get your point with prefix versus template, and that's a valid point to just restrict it to what we need. Yeah,
that's really easy to do. So that's fine.
Yeah, that's why I meant like nitpicking on the PR is also fine for me. It doesn't change much about anything else here.
Yeah.
Maybe about your main point, only doing it for KCP. I think for me that's fine. I mean, I don't have like any other use case that I can think of where I personally would need it for machine deployments, and I think it's definitely a tricky thing to have machine deployments that are named totally different than machines, and nobody expects that, but some people are doing it, and then you end up with a super inconsistent experience depending on, I don't know, who configured your cluster API or this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's probably fine to only do it for KCP for now, and then if someone comes around with, hey, I really need this for this reason and we didn't think about it before, then we can still do more.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. Are there any other comments? So the main ask is first of all to look at the updated PR description, all the history, and provide feedback. Good. Matthew, you have also the next one.
Indeed. So I actually asked this on Slack the other day, but I didn't get any takers, so I'll ask again. We've got a discussion in Capo, and there is a proposal to set the ready to false on the infrastructure cluster object due to a transient failure. So the cluster has come up, it has become ready, it has machines attached, then there is some transient failure detected by the cluster controller. Should it set ready to false? My instinct is no, it should not, because I would expect that to be a latch. However, the documentation doesn't say for sure either way.
So I don't think that is you should set it back to false, because all the ready fields in cluster API are basically part of the initial provisioning workflow and these how they use it. Honestly, and they were expected to transition from false to true as soon as the cluster infrastructure was ready for the first time. And we use condition instead to end failure message to surface the operational state. So ready is only for the provisioning phase. Honestly, I don't know if you set it to false, if this will cause some weird conditioning controllers, because yeah, it was never designed. So my hot take is no, please don't set ready back to false. Stefan?
Agree with what Fabrizio said. Apart from that, it would be really good if we can follow up in a sense of making sure Go docs express what our current expectation is and also update our documentation in the book or contracts or whatever, this sort of stuff. Otherwise, I think that probably just emphasizes that we should do another iteration on our API because we use ready in different contexts with a different meaning. In those places, it's basically, oh yeah, I'm ready for the first time. If you look at ready conditions, I think on machines and stuff, it means something else. It means like, okay, I mean, I don't know the exact details, but like, okay, the node is ready. And then if you're ready for min-ready seconds, then you're available. And it's like continuous data about the current state of your node, but here it's not. So yeah, just one point that ideally we're going to improve at some point. But yeah, it is as it is for now. So
Thank you. That was what I expected to hear. I just wanted to confirm, and it sounds like maybe I'll send a docs update.
So thank you for asking, Stefan. I've taken note that we should update the Godocs and possibly consider renaming status ready. I take to something else. If it's okay for you, I will open an issue so we have it in the radar. Okay, great. Daniel, next is on to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question to the PR and the issue assigned to this. It's about cluster class operations. With essentially the situation we are facing with RK2 Bootstrap provider is that due to some decision making in the initial implementation, RK2 config is automatically generated from RK2 control plane, and thus the version exposed there causes to provision workers with the version of control plane nodes. So this led us to separate those versions between control plane and workers, which works perfectly well in regular scenarios. But upon testing, and I believe Andrea raised this concern and issues with that, we cannot define or override at the default template version in the cluster class with different patches, which is possible to fix with this update. And this is purely for essentially provisioning a cluster with a specific version passed to this template, not for upgrade scenarios. So is this possible to address? Or maybe I'm not seeing the ways, or maybe we're not the, I guess, one-way door with choosing this sort of separation logic. What can you suggest? How should we proceed with that?
Stefan?
And so I didn't answer yet because I didn't have time to think through all the implications that change would have. But just some early thoughts, I guess. So there are a bunch of places where the cluster class implementation basically assumes that that version is supposed to be the same that is on the cluster object. So 2 examples. We have upgrade logic, which basically checks various versions on cluster spec topology version, on the control plane, on machine deployments, on machines, on machine pools, and all sorts of stuff, and tries to figure out based on if those versions are the same or not, if an upgrade is still ongoing or not. Similarly, we have a webhook, which is supposed to prevent basically double bumps of Kubernetes versions. And that one is also looking at those versions to figure out, is the control plane already upgraded or not? Are the machine deployments upgraded and all of this stuff? If the control plane version is just always different than the version in cluster spec, topology version, I'm not sure, depending on what version you're exactly setting there, what the result would be. And I don't know which other places we might have where we just assume, okay, this version is always the same and we're setting the same, et cetera, et cetera. probably have to reread your issue again. What I was wondering is basically if it would be possible to do something like this, where you basically say, I guess in a runtime extension, if you have like sophisticated logic, how you can calculate your version from the regular version. If basically the runtime extension does something like, okay, it gets in the regular version, we expose this as a built-in variable, and then based on that, you can calculate your own version and just set it in some other field, just not that version field. So I have to reread your issue and think about it again. I don't know if that would be helpful, basically, where you have like this one version field, which matches what you have in the rest of cluster API. Then you have an additional special version field that matches to what you're doing. Yeah. One additional thought, one last point. Basically, the reason why we implemented this is because we started from the assumption that the version should be under control of the cluster spec topology controller, and that's why we made it impossible to patch the version, because only if we actually have control over the field, we can also orchestrate stuff like upgrades. I mean, I get your point that your thing is not for upgrades, but I think it will probably potentially still affect more stuff. I'm not sure, depending on what you're exactly doing. I mean, if at some point you're basically always setting the same version as we would always set and do it based on the built-in variable, maybe it's fine going forward, but it's really hard to see all the implications. Also because basically going forward, we couldn't assume anymore that the version that is on the control plane is actually the one that we want to be set, which means it's very hard to implement like new stuff in the topology controller, which does anything with version.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the feedback. So this means that essentially the version of the cluster supposed to define the versions for workers and control planes at the same time.
Yeah, that's the way we thought about it and implemented it.
Okay. And runtime extension hooks is not out of the question. So essentially this procedure could be implemented by those. Okay. Yeah, I see the problem for us, I guess, with the second approach, that it's still experimental, but I guess it's useful. Thank you.
That's the class is also experimental. I don't know if it helps you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also, what runtime extension are you referring to? The topology mutation hooks, because they have the same limitations. So a cluster class is designed basically, so the topology controller is designed to keep control of the version for the reason that Stefan explained. And this is, and basically if we give control of the version to something else, and unfortunately, I don't think that we are in the position to understand when we are talking about initial provision and subsequent changes, most probably upgrade won't work, or the code is not designed for. So either we think it truthfully, but I'm personally -1. I would like to have only one actor in the system which is responsible for upgrade and version management. Stefan?
Yeah, just to clarify what I said. So definitely it doesn't matter if you do inline patching or the runtime extension, both today cannot modify that version field. What I was suggesting was essentially that you could also do it with inline patches. Just with inline patches, you can do a bit of string concat, but that's it. And what I was suggesting basically in the runtime extension is the runtime extension would get the built-in variable, which is the version that we want to set and that we will set in the same reconcile to, I don't know, spec version in the control plane. But what you can do is you can take this built-in.spec version, whatever thing, calculate your own version and set it on another field on your control plane object. And then that field, you can use that field for whatever you want to do with your different version. I don't know how clear that became when I said it before.
Yeah, I will try to process those things. It's lots of useful feedback. Thank you. Yeah, well, intention for that never to disconnect or I guess separate existing version of control planes and workers, but rather keep them as a single version. But I guess we'll have to figure out how to solve that for us. Thank you.
Okay, I will also take a better look at this issue. I didn't have time to look at notification today and eventually provide more feedback. Good, we are done with discussion topic. We have provider updates. Matt?
Hey, thanks, Fabrizio. Just a couple patch releases. We caught up with CAPI 172 and had a couple bug fixes. That's it.
Thank you, thank you. Always great to see Azure provider, how many releases capable of doing great work, folks. Then we have an upgrade for Mike, which is not here, that Carpenter working group has been cancelled today. I also have a quick upgrade from the in-place working group that happens 1 hour before this meeting. There are interesting discussion going on there. We are working to draft documents and using it to nail down problems and ideas. If you are interested, feel free to join. And we are at the end of today's agenda. Are there some last minute topic? Looks not. So thank you everyone for attending. See you next week and have a nice rest of the week. Bye bye.